Hi everyone, this is Radian, and this is a distortion tutorial for phase plant. So, like filters, you can add in distortions into the generator section of waste plant, and you can also use it as a modulator to modulate the phase or the pitch or the level of other oscillators. And I don't think I mentioned this, but you can use oscillators to modulate the distortion module, which can be pretty neat. I'll leave you to mess around with that in your own time. Distortion is pretty simple in phase plant. By default, if you add in distortion, it's already adding distortion, but if you double click, it will go to 0, which basically means no distortion. But you can add in, basically, it tells you how much distortion you're adding in decibels, so it goes up to 24. The drive, basically, how much distortion you're adding. Pretty simple. Bias, less common, more obscure type of control. Basically adds DC offset. Can be useful if you want to make your sound a bit less hollow sounding. And mix will it'll mix in the distortion. So you can have, let's say, a shit ton of distortion, but it's not mixed in, so you won't hear anything. You can add in a little bit of your really crushed distortion, so I'm getting a type of distortion in here right now. The distortion tends to really squarify things, square eyes. It turns things into really square type waves. You have 5 types of distortion. So overdrive is the default, basically turns your signal way up and it distorts it that way. Saturation adds a bit more harmonics, so it's not that noticeable, but you'll see when I change it to saturation, the edges get a bit sharper. That's basically more harmonics being added in. It's a slightly different harmonic profile. Fullback, it takes the highest amplitude sections of the waveform and bends them in back towards the center line. Then bias, when you change the bias knob with fullback, it makes kind of it does an interesting thing. It doesn't really add DC offset, it's kind of like a phase width control with fullback, which is interesting. Sine distortion, kind of like FM. Also seems to do a different thing when you change the bias knob. And hard clipping, it's just straight up, what happens when you go over 0 decibels, you get clipping. And then bias, again, kind of a phase mod type deal. Let's see, if I add in a sine, if I change my oscillator to a sine wave, it does a similar thing. And yeah, that's pretty much it for distortion.